In Lightroom, there's a whole bunch of different, functions out there. There's a library function where you can see a whole bunch of pictures at a time. We're going to be looking mostly at the develop module, and in the develop module there's a whole bunch of sliders that you can use, and these of course affect the stated thing, contrast or exposure, or you could just play with your whites or your highlights, etc. So these are the sliders that affect the picture globally, and hopefully people are somewhat familiar with those already. We won't be spending a lot of time on those. What we're going to be spending our time on is masking and local adjustments. And this portion up here, hopefully you can see my mouse. These are what makes the local adjustments work. The very first icon is just to bring back the basic panel, but if you push one of the other icons, then this is the one that you would use up here to add. This little gear wheel is what you would use to add a mask, and we'll be spending most of our time focusing on these masks, etc. Just so for completeness, next to it is a red eye facility, not something that I use very often. Next to that is a healing capability, again not something we're going to be spending a lot of time on tonight. And then we have the cropping function, and then this little button is what closes all of that and puts you back into your regular panel. Okay, so what's interesting is the strength of masking has gotten so good that I'm using Lightroom more and more and more, and very rarely now even having to go into Photoshop to do some fairly complicated things. So let me give you some simple examples. Okay, here's a landscape type image, and if you look at this thing, you'll see there's a number of masks that I've already applied. And I did things to the sky, and I did things to the field, and I've added a little vignette, and I did things to the roof, etc. And if I take all the masks away, let me just click this little button at the top here, it just takes all the masks away, and this is what the picture looked like before I did a little bit of fine-tuning. So this is the kind of stuff that I'm going to be showing you how to do. Let me give you another example here. So here's a little sphere, and there's a whole bunch of masks, and as I move my mouse over each one, you see what each mask is doing. Each little mask, I'm just creating some shading, and there's some shading on the ball. There's a little bit of highlight, okay, so on and so forth. So if I take all the masks away, this is what this image actually looks like. It's just a circle on a gray background. So all of the sphere type effect that you saw was just a series of masks and shading that we did. So you can do a fair amount of what we call dodging and burning with these capabilities. Let me see if I can give you another one here. And so here's an image with some masks, and there's something in near the top, some yellow light. There's some brightness falling just on the model. There's some darkness that I'm putting onto the floor, and then there's some sort of an artificial spotlight effect. So if I take those masks away, this is what the picture would have looked like without the masks. And that in itself is a whole bunch of global adjustments. If I do a reset, this is what the image originally looked like when I took it. And it sort of had a lot of distractions in the background, and the ceiling light hanging down, and some whatever it is, electrical panels in the back. So it's fairly easy to turn around and get to this kind of an effect, and you find yourself with a much more dramatic, dynamic picture, and you can even give yourself alternatives. Here's another one where I created a bit of a two-tone type of effect. So that's what we're going to be doing today, and we're going to be kind of walking through each of the tools one at a time. So let me just start with something very, very simple, and this is a picture of a gray card. Exciting, eh? So all I've done is I've used that. Oh, I got a message here saying my microphone is noisy. Hopefully you're hearing me okay. Anyways, so this is a gray card, and essentially if I just reset this is just the way I took the picture of the gray card, and what I normally do in Develop module is I will take my white balance and I just click somewhere on my gray card, and it just makes it pure gray. So that's just why I take pictures of gray cards in my studio, just to make sure I've got the light balance. But it happens to be a good picture for showing all the various types of shading that we can do. So let's start with adding a mask. So a mask is a way of selecting an area in a picture that you want to do something with. So the most simple mask is a brush, and that was one of the first things that you could do in Lightroom way back when, is you could click on brush, and then when you're given a new brush, you can brush an area, and whatever you brush has a certain effect. That's kind of the equivalent of a layer in Photoshop, if you're familiar with Photoshop. So I can take this brush, I can make it bigger, I can make it smaller. Okay, and I'm hitting the square bracket keys, right square bracket and left square bracket, or I can I can use the wheel on my mouse to make it bigger and larger. And then finally I can use the size indicator here to make it bigger and smaller as well. The other features is I can use a feather. Right now it's maximum feather, which is what I have now. If I take the feather away, then this becomes a very hard brush. Okay, so there's no really delineation between the brush starts and where the brush ends. Flow is how fast I'm putting things out. If I put it at maximum flow, then that's my maximum flow. Control Z just to undo it. And then if I bring the flow down, oops, then I'm painting, and if I paint over and over and over again, eventually it builds up. Let me bring the flow really down low, let me bring up the feather, and I can paint an area and it's barely coming on. And I can paint it and paint it and paint it. And if I paint over it again, over and over and over again, it'll eventually build up to the point where it reaches maximum density. Right now the maximum density is set to 100. So if I want to get, very fast to get to 100 density, I can just put the flow up to 100, and as soon as I put the brush down, I'm getting 100% density. In Photoshop, if you paint over something with the brush over and over again, you will build up the density more and more and more. Lightroom acts a little bit differently. If I take the density and I bring it down, when I paint on top of something, it actually brings the density down. So right now the density is set to 14, so the maximum density I'm going to get is 14. So this is 14, and I'm going to make this 14, and if I paint over and over and over again, it's all going to blend in, and this area right here is at 14. If I bring it up, then this area here is now at 51. And if I bring it up again, this area here is now 100. So you can get a fair amount of control in terms of what you're doing in terms of these effects. And you can paint. You can also hit the erase button, and then again you have some of the same controls, size, feather, and flow, and then you can start erasing things. And when you erase things, what happens is the brush goes away. So if I make the brush really, really big, and I eventually brush everything away, then I'm going to get the equivalent of no masks. I've just taken it all away. The other way to get rid of a mask is you can come to the three dots over here and you can just say delete mask, and then the mask goes away. Come on, there we go. So let me click on brush again, and I'll set the feather to maximum. I'll set my flow to 100, my density to 100, and that's the way you normally would paint. And so that's your typical way of painting. Now, there's some various places where you want to use a lower flow and build up slowly, but if in most cases you're just trying to select an area and you just select it at 100%. So once you've painted an area, what do you get in that area? Well, that is up to these sliders over here. And don't confuse these sliders over here with the set of sliders under basic. They look identical, but what's happening is what you're saying is, for this mask, I want to be able to make these changes. So if I click reset, then the mask, I'll just take away the overlay, the mask does nothing. Okay, so I've painted an area. That little dot, if I put my mouse over it, tells you where I've painted, but if I take my mouse away from that dot, it's gone. You don't really see it. It's there, it's been painted and it's been selected, but nothing's happened to it. So if I want to make that area that I just painted a little darker, I just reduce the exposure. If I may want to make it lighter, I bring up the lightness. If I want to reset anything here, just like in the global adjustments, just double click on exposure, and then I can just maybe up the clarity or up the texture, and so the texture is being enhanced in that little area. I'll put a little bit of dehaze, and so I'm just really coursing up or making rough the texture on that gray card is what I'm doing, because the texture, the clarity, and the dehaze have all been bumped up. And then of course I can reset all of those back to 0. Okay, so sometimes you see this little green halo showing up. That's just telling me it's an overlay, and it's telling me that that's where I painted, and I can choose what color that is. I use green because I do a lot of portraits, and green stands up well against skin tones and that type of stuff. But in fact, you can make this anything you want, and you can choose the color. So over here is the color, and you can make that whatever you want. And then you can also make the opacity of this thing really, really dark or a little bit lighter. So you can play with what this overlay looks like. To get the overlay, you can just hit overlay off and on. And the shortcut for the overlay key is the letter O. Letter O, letter O, and it's just turning it off and on. So I've learned to use shortcuts quite a bit. So O is the way I bring up my various masks, and I can see where the masks are. What's interesting is you can combine and blend your masks together, and that's where things get to be a lot more powerful than Photoshop. So if I want to, in this area over here, increase the exposure, I mean, I'd have to paint this area in Photoshop, create a mask, and then do an exposure adjustment. Then if I wanted to add a tint or a color, then I would have to, have another layer or something in Photoshop pointing with the same mask. Then if I wanted to add some clarity or something like that, I'd have to have another layer in Photoshop, and so on and so forth. So I'm using Photoshop as an example just to show the power of this, but in fact everything that I'm doing in Lightroom can be done in Photoshop if you go to Adobe Camera Raw. So in the Adobe Camera Raw panel, you have all the things that I'm showing you here. So you can actually go to Photoshop if you want to use some of the power of what I'm using here, as opposed to some of Photoshop's built-in masking capabilities. You can blend them together. You can use everything that Lightroom gives you and augment that with what Photoshop gives you. Okay, so this is the brush that we talked about. We talked about the overlay and how you can bring these on and off, and you'll find a lot of this repeats for all of the other things that we're going to talk about. So we talked about erasing something, and you can click the erase button here and then get into erase mode, and let's erase some stuff. But the other thing you can do is, I'm going to go back to my A brush, and I can paint. But the other thing I can do is I can hit the Alt key, and if you see the little plus sign, the Alt key becomes a minus, and now all of a sudden I'm into my eraser brush. So hitting the Alt key switches me from painting to erasing. So I can actually paint a little bit, erase a little bit, paint a little bit, erase something else, and so on. So I can toggle back and forth. The other key that's useful, that's the Alt key to go between eraser and brush. The other key that's useful is the Control key. And the Control key lets you select a specific area to be painted. So let me I'll hit reset here. Okay, so if I want to paint something, I will say give me a brush, and I want to, let's say, paint just on the inside of this ball. Well, I'm trying to paint on the inside of that ball, but I might in fact be going a little bit over. Okay, so if you look at my overlay, I'll just switch my overlay to a color that I can see, like green, and I'll make it a little bit darker, and there we go. And you can see that I'm actually painting on the outside of that ball. Even though I'm trying to stay inside, maybe I can make it, I can try to make I'll make the flow higher, make the feather low, and I'm going to try to kind of just very carefully, and it's really tough to paint inside that ball and stay exactly there and get a pure sort of nice mask. So I'll just do Control Z, and I'll undo these things. To get the same effect, what I can do is hit my brush, and I'll just get a little bit of flow. And if I hit this thing over here called Auto Mask on the right hand side, I can turn that on. Then I can actually, as long as my plus sign is inside the ball, it's actually finding the edge. Even though you can see I'm a little bit outside the ball, but it's not painting there. So I can use this to draw a mask and try to stay within, whoops, go outside, and I can be pretty good about finding the edges of things, and then just paint away to the inside and so on and so forth. But if I don't have AutoMask turned on and I make a mistake, whoops, I moved it as opposed to painting. I grab this little handle, we'll talk about that later, but if I go make mistakes and I start going out, then that's because the AutoMask is not turned on. But if I hit the Control key and I start painting over here, then I stay inside. Right? So the Alt key is to make the eraser go, and the Control key is to make your to switch it to AutoMask on and off. You can hit the letter A as well to turn AutoMask on and off, but I just find the Alt and Control keys very easy to use. All right, so let's get rid of these masks over here, and okay, we'll talk about this little thing a little bit later on. What do I want to do? I want to come over here to the menu, and I'm just going to delete this mask. And then I can always get back to where I was before. I use snapshots quite a bit. So done, for instance, is this whole thing the way I had it before. And if ever you get to a point where you say, I think this is the way I want it, but I might want to make a few more changes, Control N. And I can just say, new snapshot. And I hit enter. And it just created a new snapshot here of everything I have. So I can go ahead now and I can make all kinds of changes to things, start moving, start moving things around, start changing things, and then as soon as I go back to new snapshot, it goes back to the way it was. So it just kind of memorizes all of my settings, all of my masks, all of my events are memorized. So I can turn around now and maybe make it black and white, and I can create a new snapshot, BW. And so now I have my shaded, I have my shaded version, which is something else I worked on, and then I have my done version, then I have my new black and white version, and then I have my new snapshot version. So it's just a way of memorizing these things. And I don't need the new snapshot because it's really the same as done, so I will just say delete it. And now I only have 3 snapshots. So it's a good way to just remember things and maintain, let's say, an 8x10 crop and a 5x7 crop and a whatever, full-size crop and a black and white version and a color version and so on. Okay, let's get back to our barn here. Okay, so we talked a little bit about, sorry, my mistake. Let's go back to this one first before we go there. So we talked about the brush, and we talked about how to apply it. We talked about the fact that the brush has, size attribute. You can feather it, and you can, put it down with a certain degree of flow, so how fast you flow, and we talked about density. So that was one of the very first masking capabilities that were available in Lightroom. That's been there for a long, long time. So we'll take all of those, and I'll just, this little line that's over here, this little eye, I can just take my mask on and off. So let me just bring my mask up, and I turned on a color, so I'm going to bring the color down to 0. And so I can do whatever I want with this area. Right now I'm just going to suppress it, and so it's there, but it's not being shown. And I still have my little dot, and that little handle, if you will, is what represents that particular mask area. So we'll create another type of mask now. So you click the little wheel, and then you can dock this area over here, and then it just stays in this area over here. You can make it bigger or smaller. Come on. And trying to just make this a little bit bigger. So it's as big as it'll go right now. And then you can create a new mask, and then I will create linear gradient. That's another style of mask. Linear gradient, rather than drawing, is a sweep of things. So I just brought my mouse down, or in my case a tablet. I click in one spot and I drag, and then I will just reset this. And so you'll see this is the spot that corresponds to this other dot for where I drew. And this is what you use to move things around. The other one that I had earlier, I can move that around too. Okay, so it's just a way of selecting your mask. And then in this case, I'm selecting this one. Whoops, click, put it back down. I'm going to take this one, move it over here, and I'm going to suppress it again because I didn't want it right now. So this is my mask, and it's really a set of lines. Below this line here is 100% of whatever effect I'm going to apply. This would be 50%. Over here is 0, and everything beyond that is 0 as well. So if I want to make this a very bright exposure, that would be 100% over here up to about here. From here, it would go from 100% down, 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 down to 0, and continue to 0 all the way along. So if I wanted to just add a little bit of a darkening in the corner, I could just turn around and just do this, and now all of a sudden I'm darkening the corner, or a little bit, or a lot, or so on and so forth. And so this acts very much the same way as the other brush. I can have a choice of moving it, I can rotate it a little bit. Okay, the feather is really how far apart I put these two things, right? If I bring this all the way down, it's virtually, whoops, I didn't want to go that far. There's virtually no feathering, right? So the line is like 100%, and then virtually immediately switches to 0, and then away. And then you had 100% here and 0% there. So whatever effect I add is being affected in only below the line. You can move this line around in terms of angle. You can, once you've made it really small, it's kind of tough to pull apart again, but let me see if I can try. There we go. So you pull it apart again, so you got to be a little precise with your mouse. And if you want to move it in terms of angle, you can just rotate it by grabbing one of the lines, or you can rotate it over here. Okay, so either of those can be used to rotate. And as you're drawing it, if you want, you draw this line, and when you're drawing it, you can draw with I'll hit the shift key, and I'll draw another one of these things, create linear gradient, and I'm drawing it, and no matter what I do with my mouse, it's actually 100% horizontal. And if I come in from the side and I hit the shift key, I'll just say create a new mask, linear gradient. I'll hit the shift key again, and now it's kind of hard because of what I'm doing, but you can see that those lines are all straight up and down, 90 degrees. So let me just take this one, because I now have several masks. I have mask 4, and I'm actually going to undock this because I find it's easier for me to just see all my masks. So mask 4 is this one, and let's just make that something dark. And I'll just slide all of these over. And so if I just hide this mask and hide this mask and hide that mask, so the only one I'm seeing right now is this one right here. And come on, I want to bring everything down. Okay, so all these sliders down, 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 I've actually created a little custom thing that I call black. And so I've just created something called black, and then that's the equivalent of what that does. I also have a whole bunch of others that I use, and you'll see some of those later, where I have brighten face, I have something like sharpen the eyes, soften the skin, so on and so forth. Some of these are already built into Lightroom. So depending on what presets you've bought and how much you've played with it since you bought it, you may or may not have some of these. They're fairly easy to build. But so there's my white and my black, which I often use because I'm shooting on white paper or black paper, and sometimes I just need something very fast to get the background just the way I want it. So there's my black. And so it's very easy to set those up. Now these are all additive, so if I bring this one back, that's this guy. So if I move these on top, you see the white and the black are kind of competing for space here. So I'm trying to make it white, I'm trying to make it black. Depending on the settings, one of them is going to be winning. You can't say darken a spot and lighten a spot when it's both the same spot. You end up with a bit of a clash, but you get the control, where you go and how much intensity you apply to these things. So you get a fair amount of control. So brush is one, horizontal is another, and we'll just start getting rid of these things. I'm just going to suppress them for now. Okay, another very popular one, I'm going to create another mask, and there's a radial gradient. Radial gradient is a typical one for drawing circles, and you just highlight an area. If you hit the shift key and you want to create a gradient, create gradient. If you hold the shift key, you're going to get an exact circle. You can't create an oval, it's just purely a circle. Okay, so the shift key becomes handy for that type of thing. You can feather the circle, right? And come on, that little red dot lets you say the center portion is 100%, then it goes from 100 to 0, and then everything outside the circle is whatever else you want to have. So if I want to make that circle bright white, I can just turn around and just say white, and wherever this is, and I've just made that white. Now what if I didn't want the inside of the circle? I just want the outside. Well, you can invert. So there's an invert button over here, and you can just click on invert, and what you've just done is you've made everything outside the circle white, and then, I mean, this could be like a high key vignette if you want. And I'm just going to make this really, really big. And so I'm now getting some sort of a high key vignette. And if I want that to be a very dark vignette, I could say black, and away we go. Now my whites and my blacks, if you notice, black is shortcut for all of these sliders being pulled all the way to the left. White is a shortcut for nothing more than all these sliders being pulled to the right. Now, if I don't want it that way and I want everything to be 60 or 70%, I have an interesting slider here called Amount. Amount says apply all these sliders to 100%. But if I want to, I can start taking these sliders and start bringing them down. And I start bringing them down, and that's without changing these settings. It's giving me the effect of if I had brought all of these down to about 18%. So I get the ability to control a lot of my settings with this amount. So you'll see very often when I'm working, I will just apply something, and I know it's way too much, but I know I can always go back and adjust it later. So I can just, increase, amplify, or de-emphasize the effect that I want just by playing with this amount slider. You're going to find that's a very powerful slider, and each mask has its own individual slider. So if I activate a mask, then I can play with the amount of something. So let's just start with these guys, right? We just did the oval, we just did the linear gradient, the radial gradient, and the brush. So let's talk about how we would use those in a practical fashion, because playing with a gray card's kind of boring. So I'm going to take this slide here, and I'm just going to say right over here down at the very bottom, rather than deleting each mask one at a time, I'm going to go right over here and I'm going to say delete all masks. I'm going to go boop, and then let's start applying some of these sliders. So I'm going to take a radial, I'm going to take a radial, and I'm just going to go all the way out, and I'm going to go to the invert of that, and I have this vignette, and I'm just going to soften the vignette, and then I'm going to reduce the overall amount, and it's just a little bit of a soft vignette, maybe even more, right about there somewhere. So just a very slight vignette. Okay, so that's a very simple use of the radial gradient. And we'll see us using it for a lot of other things. So that's one mask, and the dot for that is right here. And I can give it a name as well, and I call that vignette, V-I-G. So now I can actually start looking at my masks and see which one is which. So I'll create another mask now, and I'll do a linear gradient, and I'll just come all the way up here. And it's just remembering my last settings. I don't get worried about that. It's not what I want. I don't want to make this all black here. So I'm just going to come up here and I'm going to hit reset. Now if you like to reset automatically all the time, you can hit this button called Reset Sliders Automatically. And every time you start a new mask, all your sliders automatically reset to 0. And so you get your overlay that's showing. So no overlay, overlay. And then what do I want to do with this? Well, if I want to get rid of the overlay, I just have to apply something. It doesn't matter what it is. So let's just warm this up. Okay, it's just make this wheat field just a little bit, warmer, a little bit of a warmer tone. That's kind of great. So that's cool. So we've now got two masks, and we'll just call this, wheat. And I don't know if that's wheat or hay or straw, but anyways, we'll worry about it. So let's say I want to there's some lines coming through this wheat that kind of just have a little bit of some natural rose to it. So actually I'm going to come over here and I'm going to say, I'm going to take a brush and I'm going to make the brush really, really small. So right square, the left square bracket key, and then I'm going to make the flow a little bit lower, and density is high. Feather I'm going to bring up a little bit, and I'm just going to start painting some of these rows. And I'm noticing it's speckled. Okay, it's kind of just picking it up and not picking it up. It's trying to find the edges of things. And look, I have my auto mask turned on. So I didn't really want that. So I'll just hit the letter A or click auto mask. And let me just start that again. Control Z. And take off the auto mask. And I will create a brush. And I will just paint this little area over here. And I'll paint another one over here. Oh, being sloppy, but that's fine. And all I'm doing is I'm going to use masking to kind of just put a little bit more emphasis in here. Whoops. Make sure I paint that. So I'm going to just darken this a little bit. And I mean, I don't want to go too far. That looks very artificial, but I'm just trying to create a little bit more dimension to these fields. So there's an interesting way to I'm just brushing something, and when you're dodging and burning, very often what you're doing is you're brushing the dark parts and trying to make them lighter. Make them darker and make the light parts lighter. So you're emphasizing the contrast in a selective manner. So pictures that pop very often have been dodged and burned to a nice degree. So we've now used, and we'll call this rose. So we've now used the brush for the rose. We've used the linear one for the wheat, and we've used a vignette for the other thing. So everything we've talked about has now been used in this photo. So we can do a lot of interesting things. Now when I did the rose, I painted them one after the other, and it's all one mask. I can add and subtract to various masks, and so this is something we'll start doing now. So let's take the sky, for instance. If I want to darken the sky a little bit, I could take what I already learned, the linear gradient, and I can just say come on down here and try to darken the sky a little bit. And that's not too bad, but it's also darkening the barn. And I really just want the sky to be darker. So that's a frequent thing that we want to do, is we want to just highlight the barn or highlight something. And so I'm just going to delete this mask. Delete, 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 delete. There we go. And so one of the things that Lightroom has now given us is, in addition to the 3 masks that we talked about, they now have a select sky capability. And if I just click on select sky, it actually does a pretty good job. And not only did it select the sky up here, but look at the sky coming through the barn. It actually found all of that little pieces of sky coming through the barn. So that's kind of neat. So now I can take that and I can darken the sky, and I can go, oh, cool. Okay, now I've just darkened the sky and I haven't affected the barn. So I have a fair amount of control. Now, what if I want the sky to look a little more natural, and I don't want it to just be dark everywhere? I mean, usually it's a little lighter near the bottom. I want to erase something. Well, you can actually take part of a mask, and I can say subtract, and I can use any of these others. So I could take a brush, for instance, and make a very big brush and put lots of feathering on it, and I can start erasing some of the sky selection. So now if you look at this thing, look at how dark the green is near the top, and it fades away near the bottom. So what I've done is I've taken this mask and I take the whole sky selection and I subtracted something away from it. So that's, now I'm starting to combine things. I could have in fact taken this brush. I'll just get rid of the brush and I'll say delete brush 1. Now I have the whole sky again, right? Look at my overlay is the entire sky again. I could have said, okay, subtract using a linear gradient this portion of the sky. And I get the same effect as before, right? And now look at my gradient, and I've got it dark at the top and kind of light at the bottom. And I can play with this. I can go, okay, I can go a little bit higher, and then now all of a sudden, definitely I'm just getting the top portion of the sky. I'm not getting anything near the horizon, and all the little lines in the bar in between the barn are pretty much gone. So let me get rid of that. Now if I start darkening my sky, you see that the sky is really only being darkened in the very top portion. So I have a fair amount of control when I start playing with these things and adding them all together. Now, so sky is one of the new features and fairly powerful, and we'll get to play with some of that. One of the other ones that's available is something called subject, and we'll talk about that in more detail. We'll also talk about background. Background is really the opposite of subject, so we'll talk about those together. But a really interesting one that most people don't know about or don't use is objects. So once upon a time, if I wanted to darken this portion of the roof, I would have to say create brush, and then I could reduce it, and then I could say, turn on the auto mask, and then I could try to paint this area. I could see I went over too far, and I could try to paint this little area and try to stay in there and paint this portion of the roof, and then darken the roof a little bit. And you can see that I didn't paint it evenly everywhere, so let me just try again and make sure that I got it all. Anyways, that's the way we would have to do it once upon a time. Now, object is kind of interesting. I'm going to delete this and delete mask 2. I can say find an object for me. So create object, and I'm going to paint, roughly over here. Oops, sorry, I clicked on something I shouldn't have. Let me start that again. Delete. I'm using a tablet, and the wand has some little buttons on the side, so sometimes I push those buttons. Brush. No, that's not what I wanted. Object. So if you start on the wrong one, just choose another one. So I'm just going to choose my item here, and I just say this is the thing that I want. And I don't have to be very exact, and this thing all filled in over here. I don't know if I have to fill it in completely. I just typically fit it in, and it sits there detecting, and it goes off and says, I think I found what you wanted. Okay, now, there's a little piece on the corner missing over here. So I can come over here, and I can say add, and I can add brush. I can add, a circle. I can add anything I want, but I'll just say add another object, and I'll try to select, just little bits of the roof here, and see what it does. No, it couldn't find anything. All right, so I will just add brush, and I'll have to be a little more careful. I've got my mask turned on, so I'll just do a little bit of in here, and I don't think it's going to make a difference. Now here's something, when I get a corner, sometimes I just fill in the corner, and then I hit the Alt key, so now I'm in erase mode, make it smaller, reduce the feather. Oops, come on. Come on, guys. Alt, and I just erase. So I'll draw in what I want, and it's actually, the auto masking is actually working quite good. But if I take the auto mask off, just to demonstrate, and I got sloppy, then I can hit the Alt key, and I can just say, okay, just erase. So that's how I get into tight corners, is I just don't worry about making the brush teeny and trying to get into the corner. I just make the brush a little bit bigger, and then I turn around and erase what I don't want. Anyways, so now I've got this thing, which I will call roof, and it consists of the brush that I just did in the little corner and the object that it's selected. So these two things together form the roof. Now I can turn around and make the roof a little bit darker, and I just hit Z to go out, and I can just play around with the overall look that I want, and give me maybe improve the shadows or reduce the shadows, reduce the highlights, whatever. I'm just making the roof kind of tie in with the rest of the barn. So this is kind of my way of masking just the roof. So the object then is a way of selecting just certain things that you want, and I'm finding it's pretty handy. Sometimes you miss things like the corner, but you need to, it's a lot faster than trying to detail it all out yourself and finding all the various pieces. All right, so we've done all of those things. I can reduce this, go to an overall picture, make the overall picture a little bit warmer. Whoops, I should be over here. Forget the exposure. Bump up the highlights a little bit. Anyways, I mean, we're not going to spend a lot of time on the overall things, but I mean, it's quite different if I just take the masks off and on. I can make a fair amount of difference to the overall image. Okay, so now come over here and let's see, which ones have we missed? Any questions as we go along? I'm monitoring the chat and I'm not seeing anything, so that's possibly good, and nobody's interrupted me. Okay, I'm going to come over here, and so this is an interesting example of using a lot of different masks, and it's if I start taking each of these things away one at a time, then the background is just making everything white. The highlight is just that little white dot on the top of the ball. The shading is what's giving the ball some overall shading. Okay, so I could take all of these away. Let's go delete all masks. And I'm not going to try to recreate all of this, but I'll just give you some quick ideas of how you might be able to take some of this stuff. Radial gradient. I'm going to draw a radial gradient. And I'll put it here, and I'll just, make that a little bit of a shadow. And what's the problem with this? Well, the shadow is affecting everything, including the ball. So I've got a couple of options. I could try to subtract some sort of a secondary gradient and try to do something like this and try to subtract it out there and fiddle fart around and do this and make it a little bit bigger and whoops, come on. And you see it doesn't quite match down at the corner here. It's not quite right. Anyway, so I can do all of that, or I can delete that and say I'm going to take this thing and I'm going to subtract. What am I going to subtract? Well, I want to subtract the circle. Well, maybe this thing called subject would be a good thing to use. So I'll say select subject, and it's going to think about it, and it's going to find what the subject is of this photo, and bingo. Oh, that was kind of neat. I now have a shadow underneath the ball. Let me create another shadow. I'm going to take this one, and I'm going to duplicate it. So I can just duplicate this overall mask. So it's exactly the same thing as the other one, but it's got the ball already subtracted. But I'm going to take this one and I'm going to make it a little bit smaller and move it up a little bit. And so I'm building a little bit more of a layer, right? And then I can take this whole thing and then duplicate it again and move it up a little bit and make it smaller as well. And all I'm trying to do is create darker and darker shadows. Okay, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time playing with it, but you can see I can move these things around and so on. I want to create a highlight on the ball. I'm going to create a new one. I'm just going to radial. I'm just going to say, okay, over here is where I want to go. And I'm just looking for a bright spot on the ball. And I'm just going to create a little bright spot. And so on. And I just keep building it up until eventually I end up with the overall effect that I want. But the intention is the goal is to have one mask, then another mask, then another mask to eventually build up what you're looking for. And these masks are very easy to take off and put on. You can just highlight one and take it off. You can copy them. You can give each one of them a name, as we did earlier with the wheat and the roof and the sky and so on and so forth. So I tend to work with a lot of people, and I find it's fairly handy to be able to do this type of thing. So let's go over here and let's rebuild this one, and you'll see a couple of different techniques that we're going to use. So we'll get rid of these masks. And so very simple, we're just going to create the overall, click on this one, and we're just going to create the linear gradient. And I'm just going to come down here and say, okay, there's one that I want to have. Now, if I want to, I could create another linear gradient, and I can put that one over here. I now have two of them. Okay, I have two masks, and the difference between what I just did, which is the way it used to be, is every one of these has its own separate point. There's a point here where I can take this one and I can move it, and I can take this one and I can move it, but each of them is got its own menu. So if I make this one a certain darkness, I have to kind of remember what I did and go over here and make this one exactly the same darkness. Or if I don't want them to be the same darkness, then obviously I have that control. But if I want them to be the same and I want to be able to adjust them at the same time, rather than creating two masks, I'm better off I'm just going to get rid of these. I'm just going to click on that dot and hit the delete key, just make my life easy. And then I'm going to draw my mask, create linear gradient, and I'm going to draw this, hello, there, I'm going to draw this one, and then I'm going to add to this mask. I'm going to say add another linear gradient, and now these two are in fact part of the same mask. I can get rid of them at the same time. I can delete them both, and you can see how the mask, you can sort of a thumbnail, I don't know if you guys can see that, especially if you're on a phone or a tablet, but that thumbnail shows me more or less what the overall overlay looks like. Okay, so that's what it looks like. Now if I'm making a change, I'm making a change to both sides at the same time. All right, so that's kind of the advantage of putting everything in one mask, is you can control them all at the same time. The disadvantage is if you want one to be a little bit more than the other, they're hooked to the same menu. Everything you do, whether you add, color to this or whatever you're doing, everything will be done simultaneously to both of them. So put together the things that you want to control as one intensity, one layer of menu, and keep separate your masks, the things that you might want to have separate, because that way you'll just have more control. Now in this particular case, let's see what happens when I say select subject. And I get pretty much the model, a little extra around the feet, I get the pole, and so on. So if I wanted to make a change to just the model and not the pole or anything like that, I would have to subtract. I would use my brush, and I'd just brush away the pole. Right? I could just kind of move this stuff away. Whoops, so I'm going with a low flow, which is going slowly, and I could just do this. Whoops, and I just clean this up a little bit. Okay, so that's kind of a quick way to say if you got the wrong subject or a little bit too much, you just go ahead and clean it up a little bit. So a lot of the work is done for you automatically, and I can see places where it probably went a little too far, and I can start cleaning it up. But it does a pretty darn good job, and in most cases I don't even have to clean it up because it finds enough of what I'm looking for. So let me use this subject in a couple of different ways. I will remove this temporarily, and let's go back to this guy. If you look at this particular mask, and I'll call that, I don't know, lights or something like that, I will darken this. It's darkening her hair as well because of where it is, and I'm sitting there going, do I want to change that or not? So what I'm going to have to do is subtract from this her hair. I can actually use a brush and brush away some of her hair. I'll just say subtract subject, since I already know it's doing a pretty good job. And now all of a sudden the hair is appearing a little bit separate from the mask, and if I turn on the mask, you can see where the mask is cutting through the hair, but it then cut the hair out. So the mask is no longer interfering with her hair. So that's a very fast way to do that. And then if I wanted to create a light from the top roof, I'm going to create, let's say, I could do it, let's do it with a radial. It doesn't really matter. So I'll just create something over here, and I'm just going to create a bright yellow light. And I'm just going to give it a little bit of a tone there, or something like that. Okay, so I've just created, so my lights I want to make dark. I've just added this bright light, which is kind of trying to brighten my side, so I'll just reduce this so that it stays nice and dark. And I'm trying to create a little bit of a color look on her face. That's kind of okay. What I'm finding though is I want this purplish light to kind of really be in her face. So let me go back to the mask of the model. And I'm going to add some of the purple in there as well. There you go. And now it's in your face, but it's also along her body. So I'm going to try to take it away from her body. So I'm going to say under mask 2, which I'll say is model, I'm going to subtract the bottom portion of her body. So I'm just going to take a linear gradient, and I'm just going to do this. And so now you see the colors more on her face, on her arm a little bit, and it's dissipating. And I'm doing this really fast, but hopefully you can get the idea. So now the light is hitting her face and then falling off towards her feet. And if I really want to make it, you know, a different color near the bottom, I can just create a new mask, linear gradient. Hello, come on. And I'm just going to, I don't know, let's add some clarity and a blue, and I'm just kind of just emphasizing the different colors as I'm going along. And I can experiment with different colors and try different, see what works, what doesn't work. So I'm just experimenting here, but so we have a couple of masks here. Okay, we have the bottom one, bottom light, we have the top light, we have the model, and we have the V formation, making it look like a spotlight at the top. So I can just Control N, this is, you know, test, and that's this particular one versus this two-tone one. So obviously when I was playing with it on my own, I was taking a little bit more time, but you know, you can see the effect. So subject finds your subject. We haven't done background yet, so let's talk about background. Okay, so here's just, you know, a football player shot against a white background. Hit reset. I don't think there's anything on this. Okay, so this is as is. So I sometimes want to clean up my backgrounds a little bit. I could hit subject, and just to demonstrate what happens, it's finding the subject, and voila, it's found the subject. So I can make the subject, you know, darker, lighter. I can do whatever I want. I can invert the subject, and now I'm playing with just the background. Okay, and so I can make my background nice and white. So if I have a white background, and let's say it's a muslin and it's got a few wrinkles in it, typically all I do is I select the background, bring up the white, reduce the texture, reduce the clarity, maybe even reduce the sharpness, and all of the wrinkles in my muslin disappear. My white background, if it's, you know, got a few scuff marks or shoe marks or whatever, all that disappears in a hurry. So that's kind of neat. Now, what's kind of cool though is I've just selected the subject in this particular area, and I've brightened the background. That's all I've done for this picture. Here's another picture that I took, and I've taken all of these in the same series. What's really neat is if I have a mask, which is a linear gradient, a brush, or a radial gradient, they are wherever I drew them. So if I draw something, with a brush, the next time I copy that to another picture, it's exactly in the same place. But subject, sky, and background, and people are in fact dynamic masks. So they will show up in a new location dependent on where the subject, background, and sky is for that photo. So it'll change. So if I turn around and I say this photo is not quite the same, he's not exactly in the same position, he's smaller, moved over, and here he's turned the other way, I can actually take this photo, click the next one, I'm clicking the first one, I'm hitting the control key, I'm selecting the next one, and then the next one. So I've got 3 things selected here. And you can check over here, it says 3 selected. But one of them is more selected than the others. Okay, so it's the primary selection. And I can turn around and I can say sync. And I can sync anything I want from one photo to another. So if I change the exposure on one, the clarity, etc., all of that can go. So I can carry all of these features over, etc. But I can also carry over the mask or not carry over the mask. In this particular case, I want to carry over nothing except the mask. And I'm just going to say synchronize, and it's thinking about that. And it says, okay, I'm going to try to apply this to picture number 2 and picture number 3. Estimated time 10 seconds. Now, if you have 100 photos, this could take minutes. Okay, it's going to take a while. But the interesting thing is, if I now look at this photo, it's got a nice white background, and the background is in a different spot than before. And the same thing here. Okay, so these masks can be carried over, and if I were to copy something over, and this is not going to make any sense at all, but I'm just going to show you, if I select this picture, and then I select the other 3 football players, and I say sync, it says, do you want to copy over the roof mask? Do you want to copy over the mask 1, whatever the heck that was, we didn't name it, the rose, the wheat. So you can decide what masks you're going to carry over to another image. So that's very powerful, and you can start to choose what you want to synchronize across. So if you've made some changes, for instance, to you've removed things. I'll just take this erase key and I'll say, okay, I'm going to erase this window, and just erase that. Oops, and so I erase that. Now I'm going to synchronize this. I don't want to synchronize. Whoops. When I say synchronize, I don't want to synchronize the healing. Okay, I can turn that on or turn that off. So again, I get control over what it is I want to carry over. Typically, I just say check all. I remove masking because I don't necessarily want that. I remove cropping. I don't want to necessarily carry all my cropping. I don't necessarily want to carry my healing over, but I typically want to carry all the rest over. And that's typically how I will edit pictures. So if I'm doing a studio shoot and I've got 100 images, pretty much all the same, of same lighting, same setup. She's just wearing different outfits. She's got different positions and so on and so forth. I will get the lighting, the clarity, the color balance, the noise reduction, all of that I will do for one image, and I'll just copy it to the other 100. Then I don't have to worry about them because they were all shot pretty much with the same lighting and same setup. If I'm doing a wedding and I've got a series in the church, and I've got a series in the front of the church outdoors, and I've got another series that are in front of a fireplace at the reception hall, and then I've got another bunch that are in a foyer, on a balcony, again at the reception hall. I will just always do one and then copy, one and then copy, and I just take everything in blocks, and then I end up much faster editing all my photos. Okay, so now let's talk about some of the other things we can do. We talked about selecting sky. We talked about selecting subject. And come on. I'm trying to click on new mask. For some reason I'm not getting correct create new mask. I'm just gonna get rid of the masks that I have. Where are they? Delete. All right, so we talked about selecting object, brush, linear, gradient. Ranges we haven't talked about, okay? You have a choice of color range, luminance range, and depth range. Depth range is very special. You won't get that on your typical DSLR. Depth range is for iPhones and cameras that have multiple lenses and can detect through stereoscopic vision what's in the foreground, what's in the background. So depth range is, if I want to turn that on and I want to select just the background, there's a way of doing it with the depth range. So you won't see those unless you're importing your phone type pictures. So color range is kind of interesting. I will take a certain color, and what it does is it finds everything in that picture of that color. So there's a little bit around her eyes, and then there's her sweater. Now I can turn around, and with that color range I can, make her sweater lighter, darker. I can do whatever. I can start changing the color of her sweater a little bit. Right, so I can do a whole bunch, and notice that there was a little bit of blue here reflected in the on the pole, and when I selected the blue, it automatically picked up some of that as well. There's a little bit around her eye that was blue, and if I didn't want that, let's just go to 200%. So if I didn't want that, I could in fact subtract, brush, and just sloppy bloop bloop bloop, just get rid of that. So there's a good way of selecting something, remove the overlay, and that's a good way of changing colors or selecting something specific. Now you can use that a lot of different ways. Let's go back here for a moment, and let me show you what select subject does over here. For instance, I can say create mask. I'm not sure why when I create mask I'm not getting anything right now. Go away, come back. My mouse is not working. Actually, I'm noticing something else. I don't have any of the rest of the menu. I don't have the sidebars or whatever. Let me before, after, overlay. Normally the three dots that are here, and I can click on these things and they can add and subtract. I'm not sure why I'm not getting those at the moment. It is an aberration, but am I not getting that on all photos? No, this one's, whoops. Select subject. It's thinking about it. Refining results. Okay, so there's my mask, and that's fine. I can remove the overlay. So that worked good. Let's go back here. Oh, that was the wrong one. My mistake. And I'm not sure why I'm not getting the masks that I want. Anyways, what I'll do for now, let me just go to done. I have no idea why that did that. Anyways, I'm going to create new mask. I'm going to say select subject. And what you're going to find is it's going to find the barn. But it went and selected all the little pieces of sky inside the barn, etc. So, I mean, I could say subtract sky. I mean, that's something I could do. But the barn is in fact got all these little blue pieces in there. So I could turn around and say subtract a color range. And just say go ahead and subtract just this little bit here, and see how I got rid of the blue pieces by saying subtract color range blue. But it ended up subtracting some of the blue in the roof as well. So I can refine the amount of blue that I want, and see how the barn is the roof is changing. If I come down here, it says select the blue that I selected and nothing but that. And if I go over here, it says select the blue and a bunch of other blues, a little bit lighter, a little bit brighter, a little bit more saturated, a little less saturated. So this is how precise my color selection is. And I can do some funky things with color selection. Let me try and delete this. And let me say select color. Range color, and I'm just going to tap on her forehead right here. Now it's selected a bunch of stuff. I'm going to narrow it down, narrow it down, narrow it down, narrow it down. And you can see that it's selected their forehead and a bunch of stuff around it and some stuff in the background I'm not going to worry about. But it missed part of her cheek. One of the things I can do is grow my color selection. So I can hit the Shift key and say also include this color. And then you can see it's selected more, but it still missed a piece of the cheek. So I can try to click on that little area that it kind of missed, or I can actually take an area, and I'm just going to remove my finger from the Shift key for a moment. Let me just start again. I'll just click here, and that's just that. Now if I want to get more, I can hit the Shift key and say Add. You can see the plus sign showing up. And then I can say take all this range of color. And now I'm taking everything in that rectangle. And there we go. And now if I wanted to start erasing things, subtract, brush, and I can just start erasing stuff if I need to. But it's a way to select something which isn't subject, it isn't background, but it's an opportunity to do something a little bit more creative. And sometimes when you have something of a unique color like her sweater, you can do a fair amount by selecting color. The other thing that's there is color range, again, lighting range, and I will get rid of this, delete, 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 delete. You can create a mask with a luminance range. And let's say I'll pick up her dark hair. And so it's picked up everything that's dark in this photo. And then I can actually reduce that range, and I can sort of feather it. This is kind of like the feathering. And I can just really narrow it down. So what's happened here is it's just picked up the darkest parts of her hair, and I don't know why I'd want to do that. I mean, do I want to give her some sort of a funky color? I don't even know if I can do that. Her hair's so black, the blue's not showing up. I can maybe make it brighter. Get rid of this mask, delete. And I'm going to try to make her hair brighter. It's not really getting very bright. It's awfully dark. So yellow hair, red hair, I don't know. It's just not really giving me what I'm looking for. But again, it's not something that you would use a whole lot of. But yet another way to select things, and the more tools you have to select, the more power you have. All right, so let's move on to, and let's just get rid of this because it looks terrible. Reset. All right, so let's move on to some nice powerful tools. We said we could select subject. We said we could select background. So here's my background for this particular image. And again, it's not giving me my menu. I'm not sure why it's doing that. These are dead. I should be able to. I should be able to click on these things, and I'm not sure why I'm not able to. Oh, well, it doesn't matter. I was going to get rid of them anyway, so delete all masks. All right, so now I can select my background. So it's going to give me whatever it thinks is the background, and I can then, play with that a little bit. Typically what I might do for the background is darken it a little bit, because your eye goes to the brightest part, so I might darken the background a little bit. I may take some of the texture away, take some of the contrast away, so a little bit of a depth of field type of look. And now I have this person. Well, one of the things I can do with people is I can say create a mask, select people, and then it goes into a really in-depth analysis, and it might show you 2 or 3 people here. Okay, so you might see 2 or 3 people if you had 3 people in the image. And then you can click on that person, and it's going to go another layer down between the subject. It says, do you want the entire person? Do you want their skin or their face? Do you want the body skin? Do you want their eyebrows? Do you want the whites of their eyes? Do you want the pupils and the iris? Do you want the lips? Do you want the hair? And you could actually just pick all of those things and say, create 7 separate masks. Or you could just leave that off and it'll just put all of that in one mask, which is probably not very practical. But if I create 7 separate masks and say create mask, it's going to go ahead and create all of these masks. And now I can do something with each one. Okay, so this one here is the person's hair. And again, I'll just reset that. And I'll get rid of the overlay. And so her hair is here, and I can give it a little bit more, just give it a little bit more red. And just, put a little bit of red in her hair. That's way too much, but anyways. So if I put too much red, again, I can either play with this, or I can just reduce the intensity. That's 0, and that's a little bit. Now her face, that's looking ghastly, right? That's her face there. Reset. And that's the eyes. That's the lips. And when I click on these things, I can see which one it's giving me. The eyes, eyebrows, come on. There's the face. And I don't know why that's so bright, but so I can just, so on the face, what I can do is, again, I've got a number of controls I can just turn down here, and one of my go-to ones is Skin Soften MG, and that's really a little bit of texture, a little bit of clarity come down, a little bit of sharpness up, and everything else stays the same. So it's just a way of cleaning up the face, and if it's too much, the face is looking plasticky, I can bring the intensity down. So you can see the effect. That's really up high, that's really low, and so I can turn on my overall slider and bring it down. And then I can do the same thing over here, mask, and this is her body skin. I probably don't want to do very much with that, just hit reset. But if this was a boudoir or whatever, I might want to do something with the overall skin. Eyebrows, again, what do I want to do with that? Well, I mean, I can come down here and say, sharpen or darken or whatever, and do something with the eyebrows, and so on. And I can do these all individually one at a time. But what I've done is taken all of these, created a set of adjustments that I've created on a regular basis, and I came over here and I can just show you, I'll just say add, and I'm going to say create preset, and I'm just going to say meetup example, and what I'm going to do is keep everything checked off, except I'm going to say save my masks, and I want all of these masks to be saved. Now I went and renamed all of these masks to hair, eyes, brows, etc., 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 so that when you go to create this, it's already done. So I'll just say create, and it's going to be done. Okay, so I now have a preset down here somewhere called Meetup. Where did I put it? There it is, Meetup example. So when I click this, it just applies all of these masks. So let me get rid of all these masks, delete. And if I use Meetup example, wish I knew how to spell, then I could find it. There you go, Meetup example. I click on it, it goes away, it thinks about it, and it puts all of these masks back with the settings that I had before. But those weren't the settings that I wanted. I'll just delete mask. I have this other one called All Masks Full Retouch. And so I can just click it, and it's actually labeled every mask, okay, background, lips, white teeth, etc., etc. In this case, notice white teeth hasn't found. So it's got this little sort of triangle saying, hey, it's not, I couldn't find that. Eyes brighten is turned on, skin is turned on, hair is turned on, iris is turned on. All of these things are turned on, and they all have a default setting. So lips are just a little bit highlighted, a little bit of saturation, so on and so forth. If I think the lips are too much, that's way too much, that's 0. I can just play with the slider, and then I can go to the next one, background, and say, do I want more of that background setting, less of that background setting? And again, the background setting is just a little bit of less texture and less clarity. Eyes brighter, Again, you know, a lot. That's way, the eyes are way too bright. And that's like she's bloodshot, and so, you know, just somewhere in there. But I can just play with all of these one at a time, and then therefore it's very easy. And then I can go to the next person and just apply the same slider. So I just get rid of all of these masks and turn around and say full retouch, and it goes away and it does some thinking, and it applies the masks for the background, the face, the lips, so on and so on and so forth. And so you can get to your portraits very easily, and all of the masking is done for you using the dynamic masking of Lightroom, and you can create these presets. Now I can actually save this preset for you guys and put it somewhere where you can get it. So I'll probably do that and put a note in the meetup comments or chat so that you can see where that is. But let's take a look at, you know, I've just done the quick face preset, but I find her face is still a little bit dark. I can play around now with, you know, subject and so on and so forth. But again, you don't have to be that precise. Radial filter, you know, I just drew that overall filter. And this is where I drew it. And I'm just going to use one of my, the default, the reason her face is the way it is teeth whitening was turned on. I'm just going to come down here and say brighten face. And brighten face is just a shorthand that I use, and it just reduces the contrast a little bit, pumps up the shadows a little bit. And since I'm usually dealing with the face and skin, I bring down the texture and clarity a little bit. But that was just a simple gradient filter. Okay, just a radial gradient, and I usually just throw that over the face. Yes, it's actually affecting the background and whatnot, but it's so subtle that it probably never shows. If I really, really wanted to, I could just say, you know, don't make this, if you look at the overlay, you can see I'm affecting that whole area. If I don't want to affect that whole area and I really, really, really want it only on the model, I can use another technique called intersect. So we've talked about add and subtract. Intersect means take two different masks and put them together and only give me the portion that overlaps. So I'm going to intersect this with the subject, intersect mask with subject, and there's the result. And so now I'm getting the result of this gradient, this glowing gradient only on the face. On off. Let me just hide all of those buttons. I'm hitting the H key to hide all of these little buttons. And so there's face, no, and on. And if I want to brighten it a little bit, I can just brighten it a little bit. And so I can play with that just on my own. So it's very easy to highlight a piece of an image. Let me give you another example of that. And so here's the finished image. Take off the masks. And her face was a little bit dark. And what else was there? Let's see. There was a couple of bright spots or stray hairs that I just blackened out. There was, the dumbbell was too dark, and I went and highlighted it. And her face was a little bit dark. So let's get rid of these masks and do these one at a time. Okay, so her face was a little bit dark. Again, I could just try the circle technique, right? Just make it very fast. And if I do this, and I try to brighten her face, it's not working for me, right? Because all of a sudden I've got the hair that's getting brighter, I've got the background that's getting brighter, and I need to be more specific. So I can select the subject, but if I select the subject, I'm going to be getting the hair again. I really only want it on the face. So I can just turn around and get rid of this this mask, delete. And here's a case where I probably want to use a brush, and I want to make the flow a little bit lower. I want to bring up the exposure, and I just want to do it, you know, carefully and slowly. I don't want to be 100%, and I just want to build it up over time. And then if I find I put it too much, again, I can play with the amount and get the kind of an effect that I want. And if I don't like it on the eyebrows, I can actually come down here and subtract, brush, and start taking it away from the eyebrow because I brightened everything. And that's probably not appropriate, so I can probably subtract some of that effect, but I'm not going to play with it just right now because it's going to take too long. And then for the dumbbell, what I did is I said go get an object and made the brush a little bit bigger, and I says go get this thing here. And see what it gets. All right, I missed a piece, so add another object. And it's gotten a little bit better. I might have to brush some in. I'll just say add another object. And all I'm trying to do is select something fairly easily. And okay, let's add some brushing. And then, whoops, I want it fairly, actually, I'm going to turn on the auto mask. And flow is on, feather is not too high, density is up high. Adding brush. So I'm just trying to get as much of this as I can, and I'm going quick. Just turning on my, okay, so I'm just turning on my overlay with the letter O, on, off, so I've got the right. And then I'm just going to give this thing a little bit of clarity, a little bit of texture. Something like that, maybe. So I just want that dumbbell to show a little bit more. I didn't want it to disappear in the darkness. And voila. And then I had these bright spots in the back. So I'm just going to create a brush. And I'm just going to paint with black or something like that. Custom black. And I'm not even sure what that is. I'm hitting the space bar to be able to move this. And I think I just kind of just a little bit of painting in here. Now, this is going to be, I'm hitting the space bar again, and I think I just did a little bit of black here and a little bit of black here just to clean this up. Now, on the screen, possibly to you as well as to me, it looks pretty good, but one of the things that I find is sometimes when I publish things, people don't see images the same way I do because their screens are a little bit brighter, or they're on their phone, or they're using, you know, different calibration. So as a quick test before I publish anything, let me close all of these masks. I come down here and I just say exposure high. And I look at it and I say, hey, that's not too bad. And then exposure low, and that's obviously good. But see if I can get an example of it. And oh, right about there. If somebody has the wrong screen calibration, you can see these black splotches that weren't visible before because my exposure was lower, and this black and the background matched. So I'm usually careful to make sure that I test my image at different intensities before I release it. So I say that's obviously not very good, and I might need to find another way if I didn't want to take that mask and reduce its overall intensity. But I mean, it's not getting rid of the stray hair. So my masking is probably not a good idea in this particular case. Delete that. Delete mask. And then this is probably a better place to do something like healing. And come on. Smaller screen, smaller brush I should say, and do this. Alright, so I think we're going to wrap up here. Come on. And let's open it up for questions, because we've done quite a bit. Anybody still out there?
So yeah, Mike, I've been trying to follow along and try out a few of your tricks as you've been showing me.
Following along and trying out. That's tough to do.
Yeah, there's so much going on that it's hard to try and focus and get all the information and then be able to use it. But it's well done.
Yeah, that was great, Mike. The part I'm not quite sure of is how do you set up not the preset side, the left side, but the right side where you had a pull down menu. How do you create those?
Oh, okay. So let's just say I'm just going to brush something here, and this works for a whole bunch of things. But anyways, let me show you. Well, okay, we did brushes, so I might as well just do brush. So I take the brush, and I'm just going to brush this thing over here. And so all I've done is I've brushed. Whoops. I've brushed this area over here, and I'll call that junk. Okay, so this area here is called junk. And what do I want to do to this junk area? Well, let's reset all of my sliders, and let's say junk is contrast of 36, and it's whites of -46, and it's tint of 46, and it's clarity -31. I mean, that doesn't really do much, but it's, just to make it more obvious, I'm just going to bring exposure way up to 100 to 4.0. So that's a series of sliders. And I want to memorize that sequence because I use it a lot. So I then come up here to this effect, and I'm going to click on it, and I'm going to go all the way down to the bottom, and I'm going to say, save these sliders as a new preset. And I'll call this Meetup Example.
Okay.
And I'll hit Create.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
All right, so now I can take that junk area, and I can say, make that the eye sharpened set of sliders. I can go over to this picture. Let's see, let's take this one over here. And I'm going to use a linear gradient. And I just created this linear gradient. And this linear gradient, instead of being eye sharpened, is going to be Meetup Example. Oops. And now, this is Meetup Example over here. So Meetup Example's gone, Meetup Example's back. And
Yeah.
Meetup Example is this set of sliders that we've set up.
Yeah.
Does that help?
Okay, got it.
No problem.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. This has been great. Thank you so much.
Lots of material to cover, but
Yeah.
hopefully people followed, and we'll have this on video as well, so that people can review it.
That was wonderful. Thank you.
All right. So Saeed says thanks. Mask background and then reduce texture. Sorry, Michelle, mask background and then reduce texture or sharpness or both. So when I'm doing my background, if I want to create a little bit of a bokeh effect, I usually select the background and then reduce texture and I reduce clarity, and I might reduce sharpness as well. But here's the foreground, and everything's sharp in this thing. I don't know, must have taken it at F16 or something. But let's create a new gradient, and I'll just, in this particular case, go from here to here. And I'm actually going to do this. Now, I'm actually going to reset all the sliders. So I've just got this area that's selected. That's going too far. I should go to about there. And I'm going to take the texture and bring it down. And I'm going to take the clarity and bring it down. And I'm going to take the sharpness and bring it down. And I've created some sort of an artificial kind of depth of field here, right? If I take this away, the grass in the foreground is sharp. If I do this, the grass in the foreground, whoops, are softer, and eventually the barn and everything else comes sharper. So you select what you want, you reduce the texture and clarity, some of the sharpness, and that creates like an artificial depth of field. You don't want to use that a lot. I mean, it's you're much better off to have a nice soft lens in 1.2, but it's a way to create an effect and to guide the viewer's eye. That's what's important, is you want to try to create the viewer's eye when you're trying to guide the viewer's eye in order to end up with the best possible image. And let's see what other questions up here. Thanks. Someone was using headphones. Sound was breaking up. I don't know. I got a message about turning up the microphone. It'll be interesting when I do the recording to see how good the recording is. And voila. All right. So I'm not seeing any other questions in the chat. Anything else before we wrap up? Everybody's muted.
Just thank you, Mike.
No problem.
Yeah, can't thank you enough there. Thank you.
Yeah, well, hopefully there's a couple of nuggets of wisdom in there. Eddie, what features seem the most powerful to you guys?
All of it.
I'm actually, Mike, just trying to redo a couple of shots I took in the summer of an osprey where I got the, just now using the subject selection, being able to expose the shadows without killing the sky. Makes a huge difference. So much easier to do than how I used to.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, you can take a picture like this one and say select sky, and it actually does an interesting job. So I just hit select sky, and all of a sudden you can see it's skipped over the bird, it cut around the trees, and so on. And here's an interesting example where it didn't quite cut around the trees as much as I would like. So I could just say, to reinforce this, I could just turn around and say subtract luminance range and go subtract anything else that's dark. And now you can see how it's cutting out the trees even better.
Yeah.
Right. I've just added a new luminance range to this. So once you start understanding the pieces, it's like playing chess. So I can show you one piece, and I can show you another piece, I can show you another piece. But the magic of chess is being able to use the pieces in concert with one another to support and reinforce one another. And this is kind of the same type of thing.
Yeah, one of the big takeaways for me was the ability to select an object by painting around it. That was really good.
Yeah, that's one that most people don't use very often.
Could you actually paint that object and send it off to Topaz and do a sharpening thing just on that image, do you think?
No. Lightroom has no way of... These masks are internal to Lightroom. So even if you were to say, now that I've selected the sky, if I right-click on this thing and I say edit in Photoshop or export, no, where is it? Edit in Photoshop. If I do this, it's going to take the picture in its final form as if it was a flat object with no selections whatsoever, and send it to Photoshop.
Okay.
So there's no being able to do that. Now, if you were in Photoshop and you went to Photoshop, it has a select object capability as well, and a select subject capability as well. So that's a little different. With Photoshop, I could turn around and I could select this bird. I could just draw a square around it and say to Photoshop, find an object in here. Photoshop would find the bird. Then once you've got your mask set in Photoshop, you could delete it all, literally delete away all the other pixels. Now you're just left with the bird. Now you can export that with something like GIF or TIFF that supports transparency mode, and you would just have a bird with nothing around it. No white square, no black square, no sky. You're not exporting a rectangle. You're exporting just the bird.
Okay. Thank you. Good. Thank you.
All right.
Okay. Just blew a fuse.
Well, I'm not quite sure how one resets that circuit breaker. Okay. I'm just going to stop sharing.
Hey, Mike, it's Peter Wells here.
Yeah, Peter.
First and foremost, thanks. This was fantastic.
Good.
With regards to the capabilities, the dynamic masking, that is just, I tripped a breaker as well. That is incredibly powerful because, your example of identifying all the various features of the face, I mean, I can see it in any sort of portrait work. You can just blast through stuff. It's really, we've got now AI intelligence in post-processing.
Yeah.
So, I'll be working on that next few days. And thank you for your review of it. You put me weeks ahead.
No problem. The key with the portrait stuff is keep it subtle. You don't want all your photos to kind of look, plasticky or whatever. But I mean, just being able to quickly identify the lips, the hair, the eyes, that kind of stuff. Even if the masks are applied with nothing, at least you can go in and do something. The other thing I should mention is if you're going to apply a mask across multiple images and you do it once and then you go to do it again, it says, oh, I'm carrying masks 1, 2, and 3 across to 15 pictures, and some of them already have got masks 1, 2, and 3. What do you want me to do? And you're told to replace them or merge them. Replace them means it's going to retake the time to figure out mask 1, 2, and 3, which might be the subject or the sky or whatever they happen to be, and redynamically assess them and figure out what they are. But if you've already found sky and lips and face on these pictures, 7 to 100, and all you're trying to do is lighten the lips on all of them, lighten the lips on one, copy the lips mask to all of the others, and when it says replace or merge, just say merge, because then all you're doing is you're merging the settings of the mask called lips to the new picture, its lips, and whatever portion of the picture it determined were the lips, it's just going to replace those settings. So it doesn't actually have to take the time to reinterpret the pixels and figure out where the lips start and end. So merging is a much faster way of propagating things if you have already applied them, and now you're going back a second time and saying, gee, I think I did, I softened the skin way too much. These are looking really kind of a little artificial. Let me lighten them. So lighten one and then just copy to the face, mask just the settings by doing the merge. That's just another secret trick, whatever, shortcut.
That's great. Thank you.
No problem. Okay, folks, have yourself a great week. And I have another session coming up next Monday. I'll be announcing more of an intro session for people who have just gotten new cameras or upgraded their cameras over the holidays and are looking to, what's an f-stop? So that'll be more of an introductory session, and I'll be posting that shortly.